Good morning, everyone. Welcome to First Unitarian Church in New Bedford's virtual Sunday service. I'm Karen Anderson, and I minister to this congregation as we minister to each other. Our church welcomes everyone, no matter their age, beliefs, culture, ability, education, finances, who they love, or how they identify. We are people who take up the call of justice, work for peace, and stand on the side of love in our communities and in our world. We believe in the freedom to find your own truth, the stewardship of our planet, and the inherent worth and dignity of all people. We are people of purpose here, and if these ideals resonate with you, we hope you might find a spiritual home here. We welcome everyone into this circle of beloved community. This week we begin our Soul Matters theme of deep listening. So let us begin by lighting our chalice. This is called the Echo of Inner Wisdom from the Soul Matters team, used by permission. We light this chalice to remember the light within, to know that the hunger we feel inside is not an emptiness, but the echo of an inner wisdom that already knows what we need. May our time together help us welcome that voice and each other back home. Our opening words this morning are by John Saxon, used by permission. It's called "Listen, the Spirit is Calling." Against a black backdrop, hands reach gracefully toward the sky. Listen, can you hear it? The Spirit is calling. It calls us in the silence and through the noise and busyness of our daily lives. It calls us in the brightness of the day and in the darkness of the night, in times of hope and despair. Listen, can you hear it? The Spirit is calling. It doesn't matter what you call it, for it has no name and it has many different names. The Spirit of life, the Spirit of joy, the Spirit of compassion, the Spirit of hope, the Spirit of justice. Listen, can you hear it? The Spirit is calling. It's calling to you and to me. It's calling us to greater wholeness, greater connection, greater service, greater love. It's calling us to heal the brokenness within ourselves, in others, and in the world. It's calling us to live more deeply. It's calling us to beauty. It's calling us to laugh and dance and sing. It's calling us to live through life's pain and sorrow. It's calling us to live courageously and kindly, to speak our truth in love, and to bend the moral arc of the universe toward justice. It's calling us to community. It's calling us into the greater life of all. Listen, can you hear it? The Spirit is calling. The Spirit is calling indeed. So may we worship together and begin by reciting the covenant of our church. We come together as a religious community, upholding freedom of conscience, right relationship, and the inherent worth of all people. We value our diversity and pledge to care for one another in the spirit of compassion, to speak and listen to each other with respect, and to promote justice and kindness in the world. Now, if you will join me in our hymn, Voice Still and Small. Now is the time in our service where we share with each other our joys, our sorrows, our concerns, and our love. Let me start with a candle of joy for Charlie Morgan and Jeff Soares, who recently celebrated their first anniversary as a married couple. All our love to them and to Brody. They are a spectacularly beautiful family, and we're so glad to have them in our congregation. A candle of joy and love for Yasmin, who did her first intergenerational service last week, and as always, she made it wicked cool and special for everyone. Candle of joy and love for my boys, my twins, Ian and Dylan, who, believe it or not, celebrated their 32nd birthday this week. You are my sunshine. I love you, boys. And a candle of sorrow for the loss this week of Robin Carnes. He was a friend and a bright spirit, and he will be missed as much as his brother George and his mom Barbara are missed, both of whom I love dearly. Our love to his family and his many, many friends in their time of grief. And a candle of concern for our President and First Lady, and all of those in our government and its support systems who may be infected with the coronavirus and are facing their own COVID-19 battles right now. Our thoughts and our prayers are with you. And I light two final candles, one for all the joys and the sorrows we keep in our hearts today, and one for all of those who have yet to find a place like this to share their joys and their concerns. Our first reading this morning is from Marge Percy, called Counsels. We must sit down and reason together. We must sit down. Men standing want to hold forth. They rain down upon faces lifted. We must sit down on the floor, on the earth, on stones and mats and blankets. There must be no front to the speaking, no platform, no rostrum, no stage or table. We will not crane to see who is speaking. Perhaps we should sit in the dark. In the dark, we could utter our feelings. In the dark, we could propose and describe and suggest. In the dark, we could not see who speaks, and only the words would say what they say, thus saying what we feel and what we want, what we fear for ourselves and each other into the dark. Perhaps we could begin to listen. Perhaps we should talk in groups small enough for everyone to speak. Perhaps we should start by speaking softly. The women must learn to dare to speak. The men must bother to listen. The women must learn to say, "I think this is so." The men must learn to stop dancing solos on the ceiling. After each speaks, he or she will repeat a ritual phrase. It is not I who speaks, but the wind. Wind blows through me. Long after me is the wind. Let us take a few breaths together, center ourselves, and enter into the spirit of prayer and meditation. This is called Listening with the Heart by Gary Kowalski, used by permission. Maybe prayer doesn't mean talking to God at all. Maybe it means just listening, unplugging the TV, turning off the computer, quieting the mental chatter and distractions. Maybe it means listening to the birds and the insects, the wind in the leaves, the creaking and groaning of the trees, noticing who else is out there, not far away, but nearby, sitting so still we can hear our own heartbeat. Watch our breath, the gentle whoosh of air, the funny noises from our own insides, marveling at the body we take so much for granted. Maybe it means listening to our dreams, paying more attention to what we really want from life, and less attention to all the nagging, scolding voices from our past. Or maybe it's about listening to each other, not thinking ahead to how we can answer or rebut or parry or advise or admonish, but actually being present with each other. Perhaps if we just sit quietly, we'll overhear a piece whispering through the centuries that's missing from the clamor of the moment. Maybe prayer means listening to the silences between the words, noticing the negativity of space, the vast, undifferentiated, and nameless wonder that underlies it all. Maybe prayer doesn't mean talking to God at all, but listening with the heart to the angel choirs all around us. To those who have ears, let them hear. Amen, church. Well, my goodness, that was very impressive. Second reading today is used by permission from Rachel Naomi Remen. It's called Just Listen. I suspect that the most basic and powerful way to connect to another person is to listen. Just listen. Perhaps the most important thing we'll ever give each other is our attention, and especially if it's given from the heart. When people are talking, there's no need to do anything but receive them. Just take them in. Listen to what they're saying. Care about it. Most times, caring about it is even more important than understanding it. Most of us don't value ourselves or our love enough to know this. It has taken me a long time to believe in the power of simply saying, "I am so sorry," when someone is in pain, and meaning it. One of my patients told me that when she tried to tell her story, people often interrupted her to tell her that they had once had something just like that happen to them. Subtly, her pain became a story about themselves. Eventually, she stopped talking to most people. It was just too lonely. We connect through listening. When we interrupt what someone is saying to let them know that we understand, we move the focus of attention to ourselves. When we listen, they know we care. And now is the time in our service where we ask for your kind donations toward the good works of this church. And thank you for all of your pledge cards that have already come in. We are so pleased to be a little bit ahead of the game this year. You can send your donations snail mail to 71 8th Street, New Bedford, Massachusetts, or you can go to our webpage, uunewbedford.org. And if you scroll all the way down the bottom on the right-hand side, you will find a button that says Donate. You're welcome to use it often. Thanks. Now, my friends, we approach the theme of deep listening this month. This week, I think we've perhaps all been given a lesson in the preciousness of being quiet and listening. If you watched what was supposed to be our presidential debate this past week. I think I only got through it because I'm a mother of twins, and I spent years having two people talk at me at once, no matter what I told them. If only Mr. Wallace, the moderator, could have said, "Boys, that's enough. Now go to your rooms," and ended it all for us. Alas. I'm bringing it up, though, because it was kind of a perfect representation of how we communicate with each other these days, how we've sunk to whoever can talk the loudest and longest, being the voice that gets heard, even if you can take it long enough to hear it through all the vitriol and bitterness. It is bloody exhausting to live amid such chaos. It makes everyone anxious and on edge, and I feel it with you, church. I feel like sometimes we're collapsing ourselves into desperate rage and shouting, when mostly what any of us wants is for everyone to just be quiet for a moment and for someone to just listen. Listening sounds like an easy thing to do, right? Like breathing or blinking. But don't confuse being able to hear with being able to listen. As humans, we think in stories of our own experiences. This is how we relate to each other. And when someone tells you their story, whether it's a glad story or a sad story, our first instinct is often to spend half the time we're hearing someone else's story recalling something similar of our own. And we can't wait to say, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. I remember when I was 15, blah, 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 blah. And in moving on to our own experiences, we have not listened to what someone else has told us when they might be really trying to tell us something. Now, we are all prone to this. It is a very, very human reaction built into our bones. But not having someone to listen to us can hurt. It can make us feel isolated or devalued, like the woman from the reading earlier. It's why if you're going to be any kind of counselor or minister, your education will include many classes where the bottom line is to learn how to actively and attentively listen to others and how to respond carefully and compassionately. But you don't have to take classes to learn how to listen, people. The only thing any of us has to do is to practice being quiet and being present, and realizing that most people just want their experience to be acknowledged. And for you to simply and honestly say, I am so sorry, or I'm so happy for you, or I'm so proud of you. Amid all the voices and the social media, many people still feel quite alone and unheard. Being on lockdown for months hasn't helped anyone who already felt isolated. And amid the cacophony of politics and protests and fear, we forget how we got here. It's because we haven't been able to listen to each other and be present to each other's suffering. We haven't managed, among all of our great accomplishments as humans and as Americans, to be able to honestly communicate with one another. We live in a time where some voices desperately need to be heard and to be listened to. We have the president right now that we do because large swaths of people in our country didn't feel like their voices were being heard. We have protests and rioting because the voices of our Black and brown brothers and sisters, after so much inequity, will not be silenced and should not be silenced. We don't need to send in the National Guard. We need to learn how to listen, to deeply listen, and to respond with empathy and love. That's so hard for some reason. I love those lines from Marge Percy from her poem Counsels that I read earlier. Perhaps we should sit in the dark. In the dark we could utter our feelings. In the dark we could propose and describe and suggest. In the dark we could not see who speaks, and only the words would say what they say. Thus, saying what we feel and what we want, what we fear for ourselves and each other into the dark, perhaps we could begin to listen. Maybe we do have to go to such lengths just to begin to listen. If we removed all the judgments we make when we see each other, all the preconceptions, just sat in the dark and uttered our feelings, each as safe as the other, each voice as valued as the next, as valued as the one before. Yes, maybe then we could begin to begin. But we don't live in a poem. Well, Maybe we do, but it's more like Rimbaud than Marge Percy right now. We live in this time now. And in this time now, it's important to speak out, even loudly, about injustice and racism and the equal treatment we all deserve, about maintaining our democracy in our upcoming election. But it feels like we all have to scream because we're all screaming, because no one is listening. And I'll say it again, it's bloody exhausting. We're all going through this. So what can we do to quiet the voices? What can we do to respond to people who don't agree with us or that we don't agree with instead of reacting? What can we do to listen to people who we don't agree with and maybe have them listen to us, aside from sitting in the darkness together and not really seeing each other? I certainly don't have all the answers, church, but I have a theory that it might go back to how we all desperately want to tell our story, how storytelling is at the heart of being human, sitting around the fire instead of sitting in the dark. So maybe next time we want to get into someone's face and scream that they're idiots, we slow down instead and say, okay, I'm willing to listen to your story. What in your experience has made you think what you think? I'd really like to hear, and I'd like to try and understand. And then, now this is the hard part, you must actually listen to what they have to say without interruption, without thinking about snarky retorts or sarcastic comebacks. Let them tell their story and be there to receive it. Take it in. Deeply listen. I think people value being heard above just about anything. It sounds so simple, doesn't it? It might not work. It might not work for everyone, all the people screaming at you. But for some it will. I think everyone at least deserves the chance to tell their story. And in the end, people, it costs nothing to listen. And we might even learn something. There are lots of people who deserve a good dose of listening right now. Parents, especially moms dealing with online classes, the kids who are so deeply affected by what's happening, even if they are amazingly resilient, and teachers who are doing double duty to try and do their jobs safely and effectively. I'd like to hear their stories. The community activists, the social justice warriors, the homeless, the jobless. I want to hear their stories. I want to hear the stories of policemen and firemen and EMTs and healthcare workers and professionals. I want to hear your story. Because the bottom line is that we all have a story to tell, every one of us. I don't know how personally to make a big change in our country, though I do encourage everyone to vote and try and do so. But I am a strong believer in making big changes in small ways. I think small kindnesses do more than big ones. Most of us, unless you're Bill Gates, don't have the wherewithal to do big things. Small things, like listening to someone, reaching out to someone, valuing someone else's story, These are the ways we let people know they matter. Small, frequent kindness costs nothing, but it can mean everything. So let's take this message with us. Open your heart, open your eyes, and open your ears. Ask someone to tell you their story, and listen. Let someone listen to you. We are all these fallible human beings. We all just want to be heard. So just listen. So may it be. Our closing words this morning as we extinguish our chalice are from Scott Taylor, Reverend Scott Taylor, used by permission. It's called Room for the Voice of the World. As we leave this space, may the bonds we feel remain. May the words of this day continue to guide and steady us as we make our way. May the silence we held for each other keep us tethered to that place of calm, to that opening in our hearts that allows the quiet grace of the world to continually flow in and speak. So may it be. Go in peace, everyone. Hold fast, stay strong, stay healthy. Go vote. We love you. We'll see you next week. Okay.